Good morning and afternoon, everyone. This is Brian Smith. I want to welcome you here to our 5th webinar in our series on best practices in educational facilities maintenance and cleaning. Happy to welcome back Dave Frank, our friend and partner on this project, who has been presenting these for us. As you may know, Dave is a 30-year veteran of our industry, has worked with manufacturers, distributors, cleaning contractors, and many others to help drive efficiency and best practices throughout the industry. He's also been a key partner to the ISSA, creating and delivering SIMS training to many of our colleagues in the industry, and really happy and proud to have him working with us on this project. Today we'll be talking through staging summer projects, as I'm sure many of you are getting ready to face that challenge this summer. And so we'll talk a little bit about prepping for that and leveraging technologies and best practices in that process. If there's anything you'd like to revisit, or if you have colleagues who may be interested in the content for this webinar or any of our prior webinars, all of these webinars are recorded and are available on the same website you went to register for the webinar. We'll be sending out a follow-up email as well with a reminder to that link in case there's other folks in your organizations who may find this useful. Also, questions throughout this process. There is a chat functionality within WebEx. If you have any questions along the way, please chat those to any of the moderators here. We'll be monitoring that chat, and then as we get towards the end, we'll be answering those questions. But feel free to send those in at any point through the process. So with that, I'll hand it over to Dave, and thank you very much for spending time with us today.
Thank you, Brian. And good morning and good afternoon to everyone. This subject matter is one that a lot of people in our industry, when I'm looking at restoration work, when I ask for best practices on this subject, a lot of people can't give me the best practices, but they can certainly tell me what happens when it doesn't happen correctly. And so a lot of time and effort is spent on reoccurring tasks and best practices because they're happening 260, 180, or 365 days a year. Restoration work is much more complex depending on what we're restoring, and for the sake of this session, we're going to focus on restoration work as it relates to floors. Now, going back in time, I can tell you that the chemistry has improved, the equipment has improved, the pads have improved since I was a kid doing this type of work. And so there's a number of things that make this occur faster and easier, and I've picked out certain things that I would classify as best practice. When we're talking about best practice and people in our training sessions say, well, what is the definition of that? The definition is that the task happens quickly and effectively. It happens, and the safety of workers is critical. The safety of building occupants is also critical. It has the least amount of disruption to the actual building. And then the outcome is the outcome that was desired from the restoration work. When restoration work goes bad or it's not staged correctly, then all of a sudden I have teams of people standing around. We don't have the right equipment. We can't find the right equipment. And then you see an actual, it just becomes a waste of time. And then I'll show you what the outcome looks like when we don't stage something properly, and then we'll talk about what those practices should be. And then we'll integrate some of the other topics that we did in this particular educational series when we start to talk about workloading and some other information. Okay, let's get started. The first thing what we want to talk about is we want to talk about floor surfaces, or the architects call it substrates, because I think that it's important to identify what is the type of floor, what is the warranty, the square footage. What is my operating procedure? A lot of people think that cleaning is intuitive, and sometimes you can get away with that, but restoration work is far from being intuitive. And so the key thing is to make sure I have my step-by-step procedures so that the quality of the job is exactly what it should be, because when it goes bad, then I have to do rework. And then the rework doubles my cost, and it doubles the effort, and it's restoration work in our business, especially floors, is way too physical, and there's a lot of risk that can be involved. So the SOP needs to be very scripted, and then workers need to be trained prior to performing restoration work. I know there's a lot of seasoned veterans in our business and on this call, but as the technology changes, the actual techniques have changed. I'll talk about production rates. We'll talk a little bit about chemicals and finishes. Power equipment and the mechanization piece is critical. Then there are ancillary sundry items and tools, and the safety piece is we'll give you some of the safety equipment that accompanies this to make these tasks what I consider to be less of a risk. A lot of schools and universities that are teeing up restoration work right now, your injury rates are way too high. The incidence of injury rates are way too high in June, July, and August. And part of that is the actual staging of the restoration work and making sure that people have the right types of safety equipment to perform those tasks. Okay, this is a side-by-side showing what a floor looks like before the restoration and then ideally what the floor looks like after the restoration. When we're performing inspections in buildings, one of the things that we see is we either see a bad floor, which is the actual tiles. This happens to be, and it looks like an asbestos floor. We would know that if the tile was a 9x9. Sometimes you can identify it by the color versus a 12x12. But we actually look for the detail work that occurs around restoration, which is the baseboards, the kick plates, the corners, the edges. And that's the key component of restoration is making sure that I just don't get what's obvious, but it's actually what does the detail work look like, because that's where deficiencies can actually occur. Now, within the floor care realm, it's all about these four corners, and it's preventive, daily, interim, and restoration. And these four cornerstones are the same four cornerstones for carpet care and for carpet restoration and other types of functions. And so bringing a floor up to maintainable standards is by far the most expensive process in restoration. It has some of the slowest production rates and the highest risk because standing on stripper and emulsified floor finish is not something that the average person wants to do. Then we combine electricity with a floor machine in a half an inch of water, and if you explain that procedure to somebody outside of our business, they kind of look at you like, why would you want to do that? And that's why the importance of how this is staged is going to be critical. We're going to mostly focus on the cornerstone 3 and cornerstone number 4 as it relates to floor care. Now, the first thing that I like to do is I want to know what's on the floor. So is this a vinyl tile 12x12? Is it an asbestos vinyl tile floor, which is a 9x9 tile? If it's asbestos flooring, then EPA has a regulation, and it has a bunch of provisions around how to do that. So as an example, you would never dry strip an asbestos floor. There's also asbestos flooring, asbestos tile that they stopped manufacturing in about 1985, which is 9x9 and 12x12. Sometimes there's an old box of tile somewhere in the basement of a school, and the back of the tile will indicate what type of tile it is. You also see this new addition to our industry, which is the plank vinyl tile that we're seeing a lot of the architects put in. Some of it looks like wood, some of it may appear to be stone, but it's classified as a vinyl flooring, and some people are trying to sell this as a no-finish floor. Remember this about quote-unquote no-finish floors is that all floors abrade, and what I mean by that is that there's a lot of grit and sand, especially in schools and universities, that gets tracked into these buildings, and without having a protective coating on certain kinds of floors, the floor actually can abrade like sandpaper, and it can wear through the surface of the flooring itself. There's also sheet linoleum and sheet vinyl tile. I see a lot of sheet linoleum in older buildings. I also see it a lot in hospitals. It's very thin, it's very vulnerable. In many cases, repeated stripping cycles can also have an impact on that surface. And so I'm very careful about those thin floors, and the types of pads that you use. Also, you have to be cautious because the sheet linoleum is very thin. There's also roll goods in the vinyl tile. It's the same as a 12x12, a little bit thinner and a much larger composition material that can be laid on a floor. We also see studded rubber flooring in a lot of educational facilities. We see it a lot on stairs and a lot on landings. And then sometimes in a K-12 school, mostly it's the elementary schools, instead of having a expensive wood floor in the gymnasium, we will see a tartan floor, what we call a rubber floor. We're also seeing a lot of rubber floors being put into new hospitals where these are no-finish floors, and they do have warranties, and they do require certain types of chemicals that are safe chemistry. Some of these floors also should not have floor finish on them. And so rubber floors and studded rubber floors were never ever really designed to have a topical coating or a floor finish on it, where the other remaining resilient tile floors, obviously you can put that on there. And we're talking about a water-based finish, not a solvent-based finish. In my opinion, solvent-based finishes don't belong on any resilient flooring. Remember that whatever you put down, eventually someone's going to have to take it up. And so it's a good idea to keep a log of what we did to the floor, what type of product we put down, to make sure that any strippers or any type of removal techniques are defined as part of that particular chemical manufacturer. These are non-resilient floors, and I can tell you from experience that the one that I see floor finish put on the most of these is terrazzo. And there are some organizations that are removing their floor finish and they're honing or grinding their terrazzo. Ceramic tile in the upper left-hand corner shouldn't have floor finish on it at all. And some of you on this call, you're assuming buildings or floors that somebody else may have done something wrong to that floor. Also on ceramic tile, if floor finish is in the grout line, it is more than likely that you will never get it out. It's actually cheaper to replace the floor than it is to try to strip that floor. We're also seeing polished and stained concrete flooring. Those floors should not have floor finish on them either. And the reason why is that those floors over time, they breathe and they're constantly curing. And when I saw a couple of clients put floor finish on it, all of a sudden the moisture came up through the concrete and it made the floor finish look milky. And so non-resilient hard surface floors, in most instances, 95% of the cases, you should clean them, you should refer to the warranties, but honestly, floor finish does not belong on these floors. They were never ever designed to be shiny, and a lot of people like the natural look. So when you're looking at flame granite floors, limestone, Mexican tile, there are very specific types of coatings that you can put on them. They're mostly referred to as impregnators, which can protect the stone. Same thing goes for marble, slate, quarry tile you mostly see at the back of the house, in the commissaries or in the restaurant areas. Terrazzo is a beautiful floor surface. A lot of schools have a lot of terrazzo, universities, older buildings. The terrazzo has probably gone through a lot of strip cycles, and it can have an impact on some of the materials that was used when the marble chips were added to the epoxies that the terrazzo was assembled with. We also see a lot of brick floors. Again, these are beautiful floors. We see it in casinos and some other areas. People put floor finish on it. Once the floors get into the stone, gets into the grout line, it's very, very difficult to get it out to snap it back to its natural look. So rule of thumb is try to keep water-based floor finishes off of non-resilient flooring, with the exception of the one picture here, which is the terrazzo surface. Most people do put some type of topical coating on that. There is a trend towards honing it now for people that are trying to come up with a more cost-effective floor care program. The one thing I think is important when you're looking at your substrates is to make sure that you go back to the manufacturer's warranty. And we were up in Canada working with one of the cities up there, and I was in a rec center that was about 300,000 square feet. And the building was only a year old. The rubber floors looked awful. And I was able to solve the problem by having an understanding of what the chemistry was. And then after we were able to figure out what the right chemical was to clean the floor, we're obviously using mechanization with a auto scrubber. And then I came back and I said, is this manufacturer warranties this floor? I said, is this chemical approved by the manufacturer? And somebody looked at me and said, no. I said, which chemical is approved by the manufacturer? because most manufacturers never pay the warranty because no one ever reviews the warranty document, nor do they contact the manufacturer. Now, this warranty happens to be for Armstrong Flooring. A friend of mine works as their vice president, and they see it all the time where we're using either a harsh chemical or a chemical that may harm the floor itself. Then the warranty is voided, and then when the floor doesn't look good, the manufacturer just comes back and says, it's not going to, you harmed the floor, and we can't help you at that juncture. And that's why it's important to get into the details of what it is that you're doing. In older buildings, the warranty's already expired. You're working with the floors that you have. But in newer buildings, I would go through these protocols to make sure that you knew exactly what was on the floor and what the manufacturer recommended. Okay, let's talk about calculating the job cost itself. Now, this is a photo of a hospital in Colorado Springs, and it's a beautiful brick floor. And over time, they put floor finish on it. And then a new base commander might come in to this government hospital, and they might say, you know, I want you to get the floor finish off that floor. I want you to strip the floor. So over here on the very far right, I don't know if you can see my arrow. Sorry about that. Over here on the very far right of this floor is an expansion joint. And this expansion joint, when they went to strip the floor, dripped the stripper down into the accounting department. And the accounting department is not entertained. It's file cabinets, it's paperwork, there may be carpet down there. So when you're doing restoration work, there's a number of things that can occur that maybe not everybody's thinking about or everybody's aware of. Now, I can tell you that there is no way to physically strip this floor and have it look correct. I would take the floor, I would top scrub it, I would recoat it. I would probably use a cylindrical brush to get the grout lines clean and maybe use a silicon carbide brush on this floor. But to strip this floor would not only be very costly, but the results would be very disappointing, not to mention the fact that these expansion joints on both areas of this lobby hallway create another nightmare for the crew when they're trying to do the strip job itself. So blueprints, what is my floor type? What are my room types? Are there any regulations? Like I had a distributor who told a customer that they could dry strip a floor. Well, this was an asbestos floor, and you can't dry strip asbestos floors. They have to be wet stripped, and the EPA document gives you the precautions for how to handle asbestos floors in older buildings. What is the size of the area? What are the obstacles? And then do we have any troubled areas that are there? Many times we'll test the floor to make sure we know what's on the floor itself and to make sure that we're using a compatible stripper. Some of you on this call, purchasing dictates to you what kind of strippers you use. And what happens is they're saving, let's say, $5 on a 5-gallon pail of stripper, but the stripper is not compatible with the floor finish that's on the floor. And then what happens is it takes twice as much labor and elbow grease to get that floor finish off the floor. So purchasing saved $5 a 5-gallon pail, but it cost you tens of thousands of dollars in labor because you had to do the floor 2 or 3 times. So I think it's very important to understand the compatibility of the actual chemistry itself because you can trip over dollars picking up nickels when it comes to buying certain types of products. And then people say, well, you know, it's stripper. I said, it's not the right stripper, or the stripper is not compatible with the finish. This is a blueprint that a client shared with us, and I think that these are not overly difficult to access, and they did a great job of gathering data. But what you see here is they actually took, this is an elementary school, and what they did here is they identified, you see where it says floor schedule in the right-hand corner, you see that it shows a 9x9 asbestos tile. Then the red areas are carpeting. They also tagged some things that needed to be replaced. Then the white areas are concrete. Then the pink areas were good carpet. Then you see where there's some limited hardwood floors. Sometimes in an older building, you'll see hardwood floors, even in some restrooms. Then you see the yellow is sheet vinyl and the VCT. Now, this is not uncommon when it comes to older buildings, where you might find anywhere from 3 to 5 to 6 different types of floor surfaces within that building. And you can't make a sweeping generalization about how to treat those floor surfaces. We also see that there's square footages here of each individual surface so that you can apply a production rate or actually workload the floor to figure out how much time it's going to take you to do the hallways or how much time it's going to take to do those rooms. And so this is part of the preparation piece. And I know that for some of you, you have lots of buildings, but your people can help you do this because once you have this data, the work was done once. Every year after that, you might be able to change it based on maybe a change in the floor surface. But having data is critical to being able to figure out the cost of the finish, the cost of the pads, potentially the capital equipment that you're going to need to do that restoration task. Now, a lot of people ask us about the production rates of restoration work. And there's a lot of published rates that are out there, and there's a lot of moving pieces here. And some people may say, well, I'm using an automatic scrubber, it's got to be 5 times faster. It's not necessarily so. You're not putting something down, you're picking something up. And if you have 5 coats, 15 coats, 25 coats of finish on that floor, your production rate's going to drop dramatically because a stripper may only emulsify 4 or 5 or 6 coats at a time. And so, and if it's not compatible, it may even take longer to emulsify that finish. And so if we just take a 175 RPM floor machine, let's just say it's 20-inch, with a wet pickup, which would be a wet-dry vacuum with a trop mop squeegee on the front, which is my preference versus using a long hose, and I'll show you a picture of that. If I'm using an automatic scrubber, I don't want to run the stripper through the scrubber. So I'll remove the squeegee from the back of the scrubber to make sure that nobody uses that. And then we'll use a separate wet-dry vac with a 24 or a 36-inch squeegee on that because we're going to have to clean that up at the end of the strip job that we're performing. You also see soap scrub, or some people call it top scrub. Your production rate naturally goes up because you're just top scrubbing to get the embedded dirt out of the finish. Top scrubbing with an automatic scrubber, the rate would go up. Using a floor finish mop by hand, about 2,000 square feet an hour. Using a walk-behind applicator could be anywhere from 10 to 20,000 square feet an hour. We gave it a basic production rate of 15,000. Now, the reason for understanding the production rates is so you can calculate. A lot of people just want to eyeball it, and they want to say, well, how long is it going to take to do this area? Well, you tell me what the area is, we can apply the production rate, and then we're able to figure out how many hours it's going to take unless we get stuck, with too many coats of finish, or we're trying to remove a solvent-based finish using a water-based stripper. And in that specific case, you're never going to get the job done, and the production rate wouldn't even matter. So material cost. If I want to calculate the gallons of stripper and the amount of finish that I need to do summer restoration, once I have my square footages, I take the floor finish consumption as based on square footage. So the floor finish might cover, let's say, 2,000 square feet per gallon. The stripper is the same. A manufacturer can tell you what the square footage coverage is per usable gallon. So most strippers are about 4 to 1. When you go to actually mix them, it's 4 parts water to 1 gallon of stripper. All-purpose cleaner or neutral floor cleaner for top scrubbing and recoating, same application. What is its coverage per usable gallon? Then you're going to have everything from mops, pads, tapes, and other types of sundry items that are used for each individual job. And so a contract cleaner will calculate all of this, and they'll figure out what is their job cost. And so sometimes people will say, well, what's the cost of stripping a floor? It might be anywhere from 20 to 30 cents per square foot based on all these specific variables, labor, materials, and then what form of mechanization are we using. This happens to be a software program that we developed for a client. And so this makes it a little bit easier because you see there's daily, interim, and restorative. And then for the sake of this presentation, we're just isolating what is the cost. So what you see is strip and recoat. So it shows us how many gallons of stripper we need, and it shows us what the actual labor cost is going to be, and then it shows us information that tells us how many coats of finish. And so there are certainly ways, whether you're using an applicator or whether you're using an auto scrubber, and then what type of product you're using and what it costs to actually do the job costing using a work loading software program. This just happens to be for 100,000 square feet. You dial in labor, you dial in benefits, you dial in, and the coverages and the production rates are built behind the actual software model. Okay, system design. I think one of the most important things is to have a checklist of everything that you're going to need for the restoration task, whether you're restoring restrooms, whether you're restoring floors. I think it's important to outline what safety equipment we need. I see this issue around stripper shoes and gloves and making sure we have the right ventilation, floor signs or floor barricades, door barricades, what types of mops are we using, not to use the stripper mop. Even if I rinse the stripper mop, you shouldn't use the stripper mop for floor finish. Do we have the right type of stripper mop, or are we going to use an applicator? I had a guy who said to me, I said, look, it's a 300,000 square foot high school. You're laying 4 coats of finish. I said, that's 1.2 million square feet. I said, you're doing it by hand. I said, the fatigue factor, the inconsistency, all of those things plays in. And he said, well, my people won't clean the applicator. I said, look, for the cost of the applicator, I said, you can throw the applicator away. I said, but our consistency is there, and I said the labor savings is there, and any potential fatigue factors are there. And so you have to determine what is not only the best practice, but what gives you the best outcome from using the right types of tools. You see pads. Is it black? Is it brown? Is it a Hypro pad? What does the manufacturer recommend? If it's an uneven floor, am I using grit brushes, silicon carbide bristles in either cylindrical and or rotary? Dust mops, doodle pad holders. Do I need a sealer with my finish, or is it a finish that I can use without a sealer? Candy stripe finish mops are blue and white. Am I going to use a flat mop? Am I going to use a string mop? What kind of mop? Do I have moss? I like moss push and pull squeegees when it comes to strip jobs, not just the rubber squeegees. Do I have long handle scrapers with 3-inch blades, and do I have a fresh set of blades? Do we use water dams to prevent the water from migrating underneath the door into an area of the floor that we're not going to strip? Wet dry vacuums with trot mops, or what we call a 24-inch scoop. Wipers and towels, stripper. Spray foam baseboard stripper if I use an aerosol can. Edging tape, caution tape, auto scrubbers. Drive blocks. Do I have the right drive block for the right size pad? I know that a lot of this sounds really elementary, but the issue is that when we get involved in jobs and someone's either behind on their job schedule or the client's not happy with the job itself, we have to go back and look at the process, the practice, the tools to be able to determine where the gaps are or what may be wrong. You also see my last bullet here is having the liner for the floor finish bucket to make sure that the floor finish bucket is not contaminated, because when the floor finish gets contaminated, then I can have impurities in the finish, or it may not actually adhere to the floor. And the last thing you want to do is to get to the 5-yard line and then to have the floor finish not adhering to the floor or having issues with that floor finish peeling or did not have the right type of appearance. And so what you can tell from my voice is that we take it not only seriously, but the detail that's involved in restoration work, if it's ignored, can leave you with innumerable things that can hurt the outcome. Now, this is a standard operating procedure from one of the leading chemical manufacturers in our industry. And so this is giving you, obviously the icons are here, but the succinct step-by-step standard operating procedure is here. And everybody does these differently, but I think that this needs to be reviewed as part of the training. And if you're using general custodians or floor care technicians, it's a good idea to review all this information to make sure that everybody has exactly what they need and they understand what the step-by-step process is. So as an example, when we used to strip floors, we would bring in egg timers. And the guy said, why do we need an egg timer? I said, because when you're looking at a floor and you're putting stripper on the floor, I need this 10-minute dwell time. And I said, you guys think that 5 minutes is 10 minutes, and it's not. It's 5, not 10. And I said, when that bell dings, that tells you that it's time to hit that floor with the floor machine. I said, but don't rush it, because when you rush it, then the outcome is creating a deficiency, and then the floors don't look right because we didn't get the emulsification we needed. So the little things all add up to big things when it comes to the standard operating procedure, and there are certain tricks and tips and techniques that certainly can help that. This is a restoration for restrooms, and this was a system that we designed for an industrial client, and it's very, very specialized. But what you see here is you see that the restoration equipment is defined in picture form. And so you see, in this case, there's a battery-powered wet-dry vacuum that Tennant has on the far right. Now, I can also attach a squeegee to the front of that, or I can use a wand with a hose. You also see a compact cylindrical scrubbing machine, which is pretty easy to transport from building to building. This particular job site, transportation was critical. You also see a pressure washer with a very specialized foam gun for restoration work, where we're putting that on the front of a wand and we're foaming down that restroom. Then you see the moss squeegees, the long handle bowl brushes, the nabbers for debris on the floor, dustpans, closed signs, barricades, hoses for the pressure washer, gas for the pressure washer, high-capacity trigger sprayers, disposable wipers, and a heavy-duty degreaser with a pH of about 13 was what they were using on that job site. And so, long story short is pictures sometimes tell 1,000 words. I could make a list of all this, but when people see pictures as to what the restoration system would include, then everybody understands, do we have it or don't we? And so this is a photo that shows us what happens. Now, this particular building, these floors were actually done correctly, and the floors look great. But what they neglected was the baseboards. Either they got rushed or they were focused on the floor, not the baseboards. And so this is a deficiency when it comes to inspection processes. Pardon me. The picture on the left, some of the universities that I've worked with and some of the contractors that I've worked with, they'll actually go to Home Depot and they'll buy this tape with the actual film on the tape itself with these guns. And they'll run it along these baseboards. Now, obviously, I could eliminate some of this by moving to a square buff type square deck floor machine or scrubber versus a rotary, but what I'm seeing up against this baseboard could be 5 or 10 years of accumulation. And so the preparation piece is making sure that you have something like this to protect those baseboards if the baseboards look good. If the baseboards look like this, then you're going to have to use some baseboard cleaning equipment or a technique. Now, when I was a young man doing this job, we didn't have all these sophisticated tools. So what we would do is we would take bath towels, we would dip them in stripper, and then we would roll the bath towel like a cigar or a cigarette, and we would roll it and then place it up against the baseboard so we would get the actual dwell time that we needed to emulsify the stripper and finish that was up against that baseboard. There's also baseboard cleaning tools within our industry that mostly look like this. The one on the far left is a manufacturer up in Canada that makes a drive block that's about 6 inches thick. And then you can wrap a pad around the perimeter of that, and it fits on most standard floor machines. There's also these motor scrubs, which has looks like a weed eater, which is the red one, which is the second one in. The other picture is a picture of a Tennant square floor machine, where you actually take the Hypro pad and you wrap it on the front of the machine. And then underneath that, you might have a pad that kind of acts like a drive block so that the drive block's not going through that pad onto the floor. Then you would push that up against the baseboard while it's oscillating, and then it would actually provide agitation. There's a couple of other restoration tools that we've used. There's a company called Drill Brush, which makes some tools there, and you can see my power tool. And we were using that particular brush in an industrial restroom where a Johnny Mop wasn't effective, and we needed to have a form of agitation. They also make a brush And you can use that for like behind toilets. You can use it on stairways. They also have a flat brush. They have a red one, a yellow one, and a white one. The yellow one is kind of the middle as far as aggressiveness. What I want to do is I want to get away from nasty handwork. And if I have to use cordless drills with brushes or the right types of tools, the restoration work should not be done by hand. It should be done with some form of mechanization in order to make it happen easier, faster, with less fatigue or the potential for injuries. So I get creative with those tools as much as I can, and I hunt down the tool that'll get me that job done, that will get the job done as quickly as possible. These are your 3-inch scrapers, 3-inch razor blade scrapers. They have hand versions. They also have the ones that are 3-foot handle. The 3-foot handle ones are critical to any strip job. We also have your standard 1.5-inch scraper, door stoppers, moss push and pull squeegees and towels, and then you see the worker here. The device that you see in this photo is what they call a door jam. There's a manufacturer called Impact Products. They sell a lot of products and accessories in our business for doing this type of work, where you put that in the door jam itself and it prevents the stripper from migrating onto carpeting or a floor that you're not looking to strip. Okay, let's get into the mechanization piece, and let me take you home here. The auto scrubbers have decks, and the decks have expanded over the last 5 to 10 years. And so you have your traditional rotary deck that might turn at 175 RPM to 275 RPM. You can also get auto scrubbers that have the ability to put extra weight or head pressure on these decks itself. And then you have a variety of different pads that can fit on the decks. My preference for stripping is these square decks. And the square deck, I can get these Hypro pads that have a grit factor of about 80, almost like sandpaper. You also have the dual rotary, and you have the twin cylindrical brush decks. The twin cylindrical brush decks are effective on uneven floors, also floors that have grouted floor surfaces. If I'm looking to get into the grout lines, you can use nylon brushes. You can also use silicone impregnated nylon brushes for all of the decks. And then the square decks, you can use different types of pads for the actual strip jobs themselves. I like these machines, and I like them because they're intuitive. I like them because they're safe. I can train a multilingual workforce or a special needs workforce to run these machines in less than 5 minutes without hurting anyone. And so I like them because they get in the corners, they get up against the edges. You can certainly add, you can see here on this machine, you can add weight to the machine, where you might be able to add an extra 40 or 50 pounds to the front of that machine itself. And so this is what I classify as best in class. Then you can also apply a bunch of different types of pads to them. So stripping and scrubbing. There's also screening for screening wood floors. There's also an AstroTurf pad that you can use for grouted tile within restrooms. And there's also a carpet bonnet that you can apply to these machines if you want to use them for bonneting carpeting. Now, some people say that you can use these without chemical. Here's my take on that. When you're stripping floors, if you don't know how many coats of floor finish are on the floor, you're going to need to emulsify that finish, and it will happen faster if you use the right stripper. If you just want to top scrub and recoat, if you use it without chemical, you'll probably remove a couple of coats of finish. But if you want to take down 6 coats of finish or more, you need to move to a Hypro strip pad with the right type of compatible finish, and it'll just happen faster, and it'll give you better results. Okay, this is what I classify also as best in class. I have lots of clients who have grouted tile floors. They all have problems with the grouted tile floor, and a lot of it's got to do with the bucket, the chemical, and the mop they use daily. But for actual restoration, I know that a lot of people look at these machines as quote-unquote water hogs because they do consume a lot of water. But if you're restoring grouted tile in restrooms, hallways, this is the quickest methodology that I've ever seen. The jets at the bottom turn. The machine is putting down at about 1,000 psi, and I call them spinners. The little tool on the very right-hand corner is used for walls, and it also can be used for baseboards and edges. You can use it for a variety of different things. It actually can remove graffiti off of walls in some instances. But these machines operate very, very quickly. It's very, very demonstrable, as you can see from this photo, which is kind of a before and after picture, and it would be best in class for grouted tile restoration. This is your family of grit brushes. These are silicon carbide impregnated nylon brushes. They're much more aggressive than is a traditional nylon bristle brush. Now, you can get these in cylindrical. You can also get them in a rotary format to fit on existing floor machines. Some people use them for stripping. They're great on uneven floors. They're expensive. These brushes can range in the $200 to $300, $350 range, depending on the size of the brush and the type of bristle that's there. But they're very long-lasting, and they're very, very effective on uneven floor surfaces. This is your range of color coding on the pads. When you're doing strip jobs, you're either in the brown, black, or what we call black Hypro family, which comes in square and also in rotary format. Black is the most aggressive. If I'm top scrubbing and recoating, I'm normally going to go with a blue or a green pad. These are two forms of applicators, and I like these applicators. I believe that applicators are cleaner. I believe that applicators lay a more even coat of finish on the floor. What happens when you lay floor finish with a mop is maybe in the first 100 feet, it might look good, but then all of a sudden the mop gets dry, the operator flips it over. This gives you a much more even coat of floor finish. And so if you're working in a high school or a large hallway in a university where you're carving out, hundreds of thousands of square feet, the applicator on the right is going to mechanize that task at 10 to 12,000 square feet an hour. The handheld applicators, and there's many of them on the market, might operate at 6,000 square feet an hour. I also like these handheld applicators for doing landings and doing stairs. They make some that are a little bit smaller than this specific picture, but laying floor finish with applicators is kind of like painting. It just happens faster, more effectively, and the quality of the amount of finish you put on the floor is always better. Okay, let's get into tips, and I'm going to wrap this up here in the next 5-10 minutes. A lot of schools and universities map the classrooms. Now, you can certainly take a digital photo of each classroom if you feel that that's an easier way to do it. Some people take clipboards, and they actually just have a square map, and they put in squares and circles and put in desks. Some people might color code them, but it's always a good idea to map the classroom before you empty it so that you can reposition it once you're done performing the strip job or the top scrub and recoat. Making sure that you remove furniture, emptying trash, making sure that you have track-off towels so that you're not walking stripper out into a hallway or onto a carpeted floor surfaces. Make sure that you unplug all cords and outlets that are in that room, potentially because you're going to have water and stripper on the floor, and have barricades and floor signs in that specific area. Applying stripper solution, don't overmix the stripper. It doesn't make it work better. It actually crowds the molecular structure, and it can affect it in a negative way. So make sure you have measuring cups or a dilution control center for your stripper. Make sure that you focus on your baseboards. The quality of any floor job is the baseboards. If you have to apply the stripper to it, or you can use certain types of baseboard stripper, or you can use the towel technique that I talked about by taking beach towels, rolling them up, dipping them in stripper, and placing them up against the baseboards. Don't apply. Make sure that you apply the stripper solution to the floor itself carefully, not splashing it up onto Formica or other areas. Do small 10 by 10 areas. Don't let the stripper dry. And make sure that when you're looking at it, the dwell time is critical. If you have to, use an egg timer or use something on your cell phone that has an alarm, but the dwell time is critical to the outcome. This is the walk behind wet-dry vacuum. When stripping floors or top scrubbing and recoat them, these are critical. Using a 175 RPM floor machine, if you don't have an auto scrubber, you're going to use that, and then you want to use this. These have a production rate of about 10,000 square feet an hour when picking up solution off of the floor. Make sure that you have a squeegee to pull your stripper in. Make sure that you're removing the stripper from underneath fixtures. Sometimes we see a lot of dried stripper and finish underneath furniture that wasn't moved. Make sure you pull it out of those areas. Sometimes furniture is bolted to the ground and you can't move it. Then you have to do a lot of detail work in that specific area. Use cold tap water. Make sure that you flood rinse and damp mop the floor surface itself. Some of the strippers can be solvent-based, some of them are water-based. The one thing that I always do is I want to rinse that floor thoroughly. And people will tell me, they'll say, well, it's a no-rinse stripper. I said, that's okay, I want to rinse it anyway. And there are certain neutralizers that you can use for that specific cycle in the chemical industry, but I want to rinse the floor. I want a clean mop, and I want to make sure that before we get to the very last step of this labor-intensive job, that I have a clean mop, a clean liner in the bucket, and that I know exactly what we're doing in preparing that floor to make sure that it's ready for the floor finish to be adhered to the floor itself. So rinsing is an important step. And last but not least, inspecting the floor to make sure that the floor is clean. When you lay the rinse on the floor, the floor is going to be wet. You're going to see what the floor is going to look like when you put stripper or when you put finish on it. And so if it's not been prepared properly, it's going to be blotchy, and you're going to see what it's going to look like. Don't put the finish on it. Go back and restrip it again if you have to make it look correct. This is a picture of what the baseboard should look like. And so depending on the type of floor that you're doing, you want to make sure that the edges and the detail work, this is your last chance before you start putting finish on the floor. Measure it twice, cut it once, and focus on quality. Make sure you got your residues off. If it doesn't happen correctly, you're going to have to redo it, and you really don't want to redo restoration work. Okay, these are some tips for restoration, for applying coats of floor finish. Many of you have done this before. There are certain types of techniques and processes. We always stay away from, on the first coat, 6 inches from the wall. We always want to make sure that it cures properly. We never lay more than 4 coats of finish in a 24-hour period, allowing the finish to cure for at least 24 hours if I'm going to put on a 5th or a 6th coat. There are some manufacturers that make some new finishes that are fast drying, and you can certainly consult with your chemical manufacturer if they say you can put on more than 4 coats in a 24-hour period. This is what it looks like when you put a liner in a bucket. It's not a complex thing to do, but it is critical to making sure that you're eliminating any contaminants. Sometimes we double bag them. That's what a candy stripe floor finish mop looks like. You want to have a fresh supply of those mops. Some people, if they're doing finishing on a regular basis, will put those mops in a trash can liner and tie them off. This is a technique with a grease pencil where you're looking at how to figure out how many coats of finish are on the floor. We usually go to a high traffic area. You stay away 6 inches away from the wall on the first and second coats. Then you can go ahead and do the 3rd and 4th coat up against the baseboard itself. But the traffic area is where your wear pattern is going to be. So you take the grease pencil, you put down a coat of finish, you put a number 1. You put down the second coat of finish, you put a number 2, or you can put down 2 dots, 3 dots, 4 dots. This way it tells you how many coats of finish are on the floor so that you can extend the life of the floor finish by top scrubbing and recoating instead of stripping and recoating on an annual basis. If you can get 24 to 36-month life cycle out of your floor, it can certainly save you a lot of money and also a lot of labor involved in doing restoration work. But most people don't know how many coats of finish are on the floor unless they use this specific technique. Okay, quality deficiencies. A picture always says 1,000 words, and so the blotchiness on the floor is either from the stripper wasn't compatible. It could be that the pad was worn out. It could be the dwell time on the stripper wasn't long enough. but whatever it is, that floor doesn't look like it should. And in order to make the floor look like it should, it's focusing on the practice, the process, the products, the right types of mechanization. Then you see this issue of stripper on door plates that's eating the metal. You see baseboard soil in the door jambs or up against the corners. The far right picture is a poured floor. Again, either I didn't have the equipment or the right chemical to get up against the baseboards in the corners, but even though the floors might be clean and shiny, they don't look right because that's a deficiency in the actual stripping process itself. This is a locker room. This is an example of what happens when you put a water-based or even a solvent-based finish on a ceramic tile floor. Impossible to get out of the grout lines, and obviously that floor doesn't look very nice. Lobby entrance area, same thing. Floor finish, they tried to strip the floor. It's almost impossible to get the floor finish out of the grout lines, even if I have a silicon carbide brush. Stair landings, same thing. And then you see in this restroom, someone put floor finish on a ceramic tile floor. They were able to get some of it off of the face of the floor, or it peeled off the floor. And then you can see around the perimeter of the toilet, it's a very difficult area to get the floor finish off. Last but not least is safety. Just some quick tips here. These table movers, gloves, glasses, I think the stripper boots are critical to all jobs. I think safety belts are critical, and having portable eye wash stations close at hand wherever you're doing that strip job in case the stripper splashes back into someone's eyes. And then making sure you have your SDS sheets to know what the chemicals are that you're using in the restoration task. The other area, and this is especially true for schools and universities, I see a lot of these in restoration tasks, and these are critical to raising up desks so that you don't have to lift up those desks by hand, stacking chairs and using these chair-moving pieces of equipment. But these pieces of equipment are available, and I see them a lot in educational facilities. It just reduces injuries related to mapping and to moving furniture. And so I don't believe that they're overly expensive, but one worker's comp claim could cost $5,000, if not more. And so we always look at the frontline worker safety when doing restoration work. The back braces are important, the gloves, the glasses, the stripper shoes are critical, and this also can enhance anything that's related to lifting-related injuries.